Welcome back to Cultures Campus, how the industry keeps beating. I want to remind you that we have the official hashtag of the conference. It's Cultures Campus 2020. Feel free to use it over any social media you want, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Now, we are ready to move on to the next session. I'm excited to introduce three awesome speakers for this panel discussion, financial sustainability and fundraising. Benjamin Dietschi is a senior consultant with the DeVos Institute of Arts Management with 10 years of arts management experience, informed by a 16 years career in the arts. Ben was executive director of Soundstreams, Canada's leading contemporary music and opera producer. Ben holds a graduate degree in jazz performance and composition from the University of Toronto. Michelle Yeung, with over 15 years of not-for-profit and management experience in the arts. Michelle Yeung has a successful track record in arts administration with a commitment to a culture of philanthropy and to the arts. Michelle is also on the board of directors of Prologue of the Performing Arts and the network group Conduit of Mass Culture. And Mimi Mock has over 10 years of experience in the arts and culture sector in Canada and Asia, primarily in development and board relations. She's currently the Business and Development Director at the Theatre Centre. Mimi recently completed her MBA with a specialization in arts, media, and entertainment management. Please welcome Ben, Michelle, and Mimi.
Hello. We'll just wait a moment for Mimi. Well, perhaps, Michelle, would you like to start with your introduction?
Should we start? Yeah, okay, sure. So thank you for the introduction. I am Michelle Yeung. I am the Managing Director of the School of Toronto Dance Theatre. We are an arts organization as well as a training institution for contemporary dance. I'd like to just give a little quick update on sort of the financial impact on our organization due to the pandemic. And so we are looking at approximately up to 25% financial impact. Our earned revenue we don't have any earned revenue coming in, but fortunately for our organization, we've been able to tap into government relief funds such as CEWS and CEBA, and we're a Canadian Heritage organization, so we also have that top up. As well, our organization has pivoted quite swiftly since our closure on March 13th. And we've been able to really focus on our core programs and focus all our engagement on our core group of audience members who are students. And we sort of did some digital acceleration to deliver the remaining of our school year online. And now we're looking at the medium-term viability and the continuation with really no clear roadmap. And we likely won't be recovering, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, until in the post-pandemic world until 2023.
Wow.
Wow.
Sorry, Mimi, we started without you.
No worries. Just so everyone knows, I was smiling really hard, ready to go. So hi, everyone. I'm Mimi, and I'm the Business and Development Director at the Theatre Centre in Toronto. In the before times, my office is in the West Queen West neighborhood, but today I am joining this panel from my living room. So first of all, welcome to my home. A little bit about the Theater Center. We are a live arts incubator and a community hub. We do a lot of work to support artists in developing new works, and also, the resulting production and anything afterwards, such as touring, which has really picked up in the last few years. Our mission is to offer a home for creative, cultural, and social interactions to invent the future. So for us, home is about our building, where we operate 2 theaters and a cafe and a gallery. And home is also about the people who gather in our space. In my role as Business and Development Director, I look after quite a few things, and I like to summarize it as stewardship, cultivation, and generation of resources, which of course include money, but also people and our space. So past couple of months, a lot of challenges for us. Since we had to close our building on March 15th, we basically lost all our regular earned revenue from the cafe and also from people who rent our space. But since April, we've kind of found our footing, and with the government subsidy that kicked in mid-April, we're projecting to have about 15% loss in revenue. Our challenge actually comes next year because we're not projecting for any earned revenue at all. And our profile is usually 50% earned revenue. But instead of, planning for things that we think we'll have to cancel after, we're thinking to go smaller and drop things in as we see the possibilities come up. So, that's one thing that has started us on a soul-searching journey, really. And then, of course, earlier this month, when Black Lives Matter movement came and is really asking us to look at the systems that we work in and how we've been benefiting from systems that are unjust, and what should we do as institutions to try to find a way to change.
Wow, we'll get through all of it this hour, I hope. No. It's such a pleasure to join two visionary leaders here in Toronto that are supporting the vitality of 2 really important institutions. As you heard before this role that I'm in now, I was Executive Director of Sound Streams and care very much about the Toronto arts community that I'm situated in. But yes, I am working for the DeVos Institute of Arts Management, which is headquartered in DC, and it's the brainchild of Michael Kaiser, who is the former CEO of the Kennedy Center, among other things, known as the turnaround king in the arts. So what I've been doing recently is assisting many organizations as they grapple with some of the challenges that you just heard Michelle and Mimi mention. We did a round of pandemic response triage planning that was for 400 organizations across North America. I did 80 of them myself. And this is just to say that this is what we are living and breathing with everyone right now. And the challenges are really profound. And I think that, in some small way, we'd like to unpack how we can move through this in the medium term and beyond in this session. I think I'll leave it at that. So we're thinking about this idea here about financial sustainability. What does it mean now? What does it mean in the future, in this environment that no one could have predicted? Of all of the scenario planning we could have done, I think it's fair to say we wouldn't have thought about surviving with the actual force of our mission. The programming is the one thing that we can't do right now. And it's just such a profound shift in the way all of the thinking has to go. I'm seeing, of course, as just mentioned, organizations that have lots of earned revenue are being just pummeled right now, which typically was kind of seen by and large as a great thing. You have response from the public for your work. You're building audiences. They're paying money to do things with you. This is your value to the world that's being expressed. Now we're seeing, of course, those organizations hurting the most and the fastest. Contributed revenue is able to float organizations now. And in some cases, actually, it becomes a savings for organizations that have a model that's tipped that direction. So that's very strange. Some organizations, of course, really high fixed costs, not a lot of working capital, like orchestras, for example, have something like 2 weeks of cash on hand on average. So this is not good for those organizations that have reliance on earned revenue and high fixed costs and really very little that they felt like they could do in the world. But the question that came up right away and persists to this day and just becomes more and more pronounced is, how do we engage with our institutional family? What do we do to keep ourselves in the hearts and minds of our audiences and our donors during this time? When the first wave of this came, I really thought of this in terms of also being appropriate and staying out of the conversation where other charitable sectors needed to do some intense triage in society, like health and other pressing needs. And now I think, you know, as this is extending, we really have to figure out what is our value proposition to our family of supporters. And I see a lot of people grappling with that. They're grappling with, how do I actually ask people for money during this time, institutions and people? And I'll unpack that a little bit later, I hope. And also, you know, the other thing I see is just this broken customer promise that we're pretty good at in the arts. Actually, one of the things we do really well is say a year and a half from now or a year from now, this is going to be the show. It's going to have this amazing artist. It's going to be in this place that you love. And it usually happens as we planned, by and large. It's like these miracles that we do that, right? But that's also been profoundly shattered in this environment. I haven't seen that before either. So with all of that coming together, here we are looking at how this becomes the new normal. And that's what's different. It's not a bridge strategy anymore. So I'm seeing organizations, you know, say, well, we've got government funding for now, but how can you rely on that? Because what's, you know, the elephant in the room, again, relevancy. How long can you expect to remain relevant, you know, in this time that will generate financial health? And as a profound aside, just quickly to say that artists, these are the grassroots fundamental producers of the actual work that we take to the public, and they've largely been left out of those sweeping relief efforts, okay? Closing my thoughts here, the last chunk of this is I'm basically seeing organizations looking at one of three doors, okay? They're contemplating at this juncture now, which they weren't before largely, a hibernation state. If you look at like the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, they're saying, well, we do theater, we're not Netflix, and we don't do film. So rather than change our mission, we are going to go into hibernation and come back when we can bring you beautiful theater again. Theater has been changing people's lives for thousands of years. We intend for this to just be a break, and we'll be back at it. Door number two is what, you know, we've been calling at the Institute is digitized business as usual. This is saying, okay, let's take what we do and keep it on mission and try to shove it through this, like this strange digital panopticon we're talking. I can't see a single audience member right now. This is what people are trying to do with their programming. And some of it's successful. Training has been more successful than programming. Some organizations are really now looking at how do we deliver a product that actually has the values that are going to generate revenue and interest over time. Yeah. The third door is just sort of like something unexpected, like the sort of startling innovation, the things that are crazy that seem to be working, like all the drive-in stuff that's happening. And I saw one festival deploy concerts all over lawns in a city and reach just as many people as they had with these micro concerts as with the full festival. Or it's, you know, the New York dance company that's doing a drive-in show where they dance all over people's cars and you put on an MP3 track, or the Children's Museum that in one of those calls, we decided they were going to do like a backyard discovery project and share that on the internet. So really thinking about what within this frame can we do to shatter that frame and come up with something new. So really it all boils down to what are we doing, you know, within the lens of our mission, how can we deliver that value and to whom? And, you know, I think answering that question is going to be really important in the medium term.
Yeah, Ben, I really take a lot of what you said is what we're experiencing right now, every day, as we try to figure out how to, well, first survive this period, and then, you know, how do we want to emerge when the pandemic is over? And internally, we talk about it as taking a gap year and finding our heartbeat. And, you know, as an incubator, we primarily serve artists who are developing new works. That's where we start with. So in our soul searching, one of the biggest debates that has come up is, should we use the resources that we have to try to preserve ourselves in order to emerge as strong as possible whenever we can? Or should we share with artists what we have now? Because they haven't stopped creating and they need our support now. So, you know, on the one hand is how we do need to survive. If we don't survive, we can't do anything in the future. But on the other hand, if we don't support the art, why do we exist in the first place? So, and, you know, as we debate this internally, I think one of the things that became really clear to me is the reason why we're even having this debate is that resources in the sector are so tied to productions. They're so tied to output. Right. So if you talk about the revenue mix, it's public, private, and earned revenue. So public money, a lot of it goes towards projects. Say, for example, Canada Council for the Arts, 50% of their funding goes towards project and 50% towards operating for institutions. We talk about private sector, a lot of companies like to sponsor shows, right? Because that's visible and that's a way for them to do a lot of other work to please their clients. And in terms of earned revenue, box office sales only comes when a production is in place. So in our work that of supporting development of new works, public funding tends to be small. Colleagues who also do commission for works, the commission varies a lot. It could be 1 year's living wage for an artist, or it could be just 1 month. Comparing that to the period of time that a work needs to take, that really has a lot of discrepancy and a lot of gaps around it. In our experience, most of the works that we have supported takes on average between 2 to 3 years. Definitely also quite a few that takes longer. For example, one of the shows that we did in 2017 called Secret Life of a Mother, it took 5 years. So Hannah Muscovich, Mev Beatty, and Anne-Marie Kerr, they started at the beginning wanting to explore portrayal of motherhood in popular culture. And in that development period of 5 years, both Hannah and Mev became mothers for the first time. So that completely changed the direction of the show. So what I am starting to really feel for all the artists, as you said, Ben, that has been left out of a lot of the emergency funds that are available to the sector is the original model that we were working on already asked artists to shoulder almost all of the risks during development period. So they have to take all the financial risk up front and then bank on money coming in either through project funding or box office sales later on when the project is almost done. That means artists had always had to find their own ways to survive development. And that immediately already shuts out a lot of people who can't afford to do that. And even if we look at, through the equitable lens, it is not equitable because if we look at artists, institutions, and funders as ecosystem that supports the whole sector, we're basically asking the group with the least resources to shoulder the most risk. And we're also, at the other hand, saying that we do need a supply of new works all the time in order for the ecosystem to survive. So, median income for people in arts and culture sector from the 2016 census, nationally, it's about $25,000. National low income measure threshold, which is used to gauge whether a household is a working poor family, is just about 22,000. So basically, even before COVID, half of these people are already either borderline working poor or working poor. And we know that with the pandemic and all the things shut down, it has just gone worse. Also adding to that, we know for sure that the economic downturn from the pandemic is hitting BIPOC communities disappropriately. So really, BIPOC artists are even more at risk than they were previously. And we really have an urgent question to answer in terms of how do we keep as many BIPOC artists financially sustainable and have their talent stay in the sector? So I think COVID has really forced us to stop business as usual and start the soul searching and start thinking about what has been working and what hasn't. And Black Lives Matter has since then shone a light on all the systems that we've been working in and what needs to be changed. So I just want to wrap my thoughts with two things that has given me hope in the past 4 months. And the first thing is that CERB has given a lifeline to many artists and many freelance workers in the industry. I think CERB is basically a form of universal basic income. So I think one of the ways that if we can manage to have universal basic income, we can basically more equally distribute the risk of creative work amongst the whole society, not just within our sector. And maybe as institutions, one of the things that we can lend is our voice and our platform to all the lobbying from all the different sectors that have been working on getting a UBI and a plan for UBI in place. The second thing that's giving me hope is that art councils and the government has moved very quickly at the beginning of COVID, and they've stepped in with a lot of emergency measures that has given institutions the ability to stabilize. That is very different from some of my experience with art councils, which I consider a little less friendly towards change. For example, when we had artistic directorship, change in artistic director last year, we were actually moved from multi-year operating funding to a single year. And that's for 10% of our operating budget each year. And now we have to apply every year and keep our fingers crossed that we will get the same amount. And that has never been an issue when I was working with companies that has never had any change in leadership for over 20 years. So I'm hoping that with the pace that art councils were able to move at the beginning of COVID, we can see a different future in how we can all work together.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Mimi. There is one question in the thing now, whether we want to just Ben, if you want to answer this, or if I can answer this, is whether emergency funds have been existence in the past. And I don't believe.
Well, there was
so.
not in this way, I think. I think that, no. I would say after the 2008 crisis, there was, a similar emergency, particularly south of the border, in the way that hit private sector funding. I've never seen this kind of a response from government or major foundations before.
Yeah. The second half of that question we'll talk about later, so I'm just going to leave it for now, and then I'll continue in terms of future sustainability and the perspective of institutions. And of course, I'm using my own perspective at the school, as well as, on the boards I sit on, and also to fill up this conversation with some of the conversations that I've had with my colleagues who are also dealing with many of these same things. So in order for institutions like the school, for example, to build towards future sustainability, we still need to continue and invest in human resource development and infrastructure development. And when I say human resource development, I'm speaking about, reevaluating the leadership models that we have, or the business model, or training up staff, and looking at the models, looking at our processes, investing and continuing to do that, and also continuing to invest and contribute to mentorship. Because when we get out of this, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, we still need to be able to have those skills to move forward. And part of doing that here is around challenging our notions and our norms and our assumptions. And it's very hard for institutions, for example, at the school, we've been around for 50 years. And so there are quite a few assumptions that have allowed us to continue in the way we have, because the stability brings grants, and it's this vicious cycle of stability equals grants equals stability. And so it doesn't allow for change and for you to challenge those assumptions. But now is the time, especially with, anti-oppression, Black Lives Matter, and in terms of safety in the workplace, that's all been a lot of the conversation over the last in the immediate as well as in the last 3 years. So those are some of the things that we need to actually look at right now. And I do think that taking a pause as to what you're doing in your organization is important. I mentioned at the beginning that, in 3 weeks, we accelerated digitally and we delivered the remaining of our training program before the end of the academic year. We did that because we didn't want our students to fall back, and we were able to because of that short period of time. But as we move forward, we're really thinking about, does that make sense? Are we able to deliver our programs in a digital world? Should it be hybrid? Could we? Does it even make sense? So the viability around all of that is under question. And I think it's a good opportunity. Anywhere where we're pushed to take risks and challenge ourselves actually helps us innovate and come up with better solutions. So here is an opportunity for institutions and organizations that have a little bit of history to really think about how they can shift to become more adaptive, more nimble, and more flexible, and to really challenge those legacy practices or best practices that may no longer be relevant even in the current context, but in the post-pandemic world. I strongly believe that as much as we all grapple and want to move forward and be normal again, that normal doesn't really exist anymore. And even in the short period of time of 3 months, we have learned to go beyond our comfort zone. And I think that we need to continue to do that in terms of future sustainability. I see this also as a period as well, in terms of challenging our assumptions. Is really, you have the ability and people are expecting you to take risks and try new things out because you have to. And I think there's more of an appetite for it not to work, but at least you'll learn something from that and learn from others. We can't all be doing the same thing and pushing out the same materials and content. Like, let's work together. Like, are there synergies to share resources and all those kind of things? So I think those are some things that I'm thinking about in terms of future sustainability, specifically for the school. If we even look deeper, we're really looking at mission, vision, values, and how we should get rid of the clutter that doesn't allow us to do what our core mission is, and really focusing on those values, because that's what's going to push you forward. And your mission is the reason why you exist, not all the other things that you're doing or the money that you're chasing to get into your organization. So in terms of future sustainability, absolutely. Viability, I'm thinking about as well. Should we even exist? As a training institution, in terms of the arts ecology and the dance ecology, yes and no. Can we make space for someone else, or can we make space for new voices? And also we're thinking about all these things and how we can contribute to the sector, but also support the sector in that regard. And I think my final thing that I want to mention is that in terms of future sustainability is just around that it really is important for us now, as much as to test our assumptions and challenge them. It's about really being honest about identifying the gaps that are within your organization, within the sector, and whether or not we're able as individuals or as an organization or as a collective, as a community, can address those challenges. I think, was it Anthony who said in the keynote around, when you unearth these complexities, it becomes even more, when you unearth these like flaws or gaps, it becomes more complex, and it's and yes, it's easy to identify them, but how do we solve the problems, right? And that's sort of what we're grappling with at the institutional level.
This idea that the support structures we create in our society that say arts has intrinsic value and we're going to give it this nudge to exist, of course, calcifies the way that we do the work and the way we design our institutions. And I'm just hearing a through line in everything that you're saying about the value of risk-taking, which of course we know isn't new. We talk about this, that nonprofits are really just risk averse. We think that they're going to be risky ventures, or at least for-profit folks think that. But the truth is, when you look at any tech startup, they're willing to fail, and fail big if they need to, or fail small to learn, and then fail again and learn and learn. And if one thing can come from all of this, it's that sense of remembering what it was like to have this huge appetite for risk-taking and changes that comes with a crisis, right? And not that we would ask for this, but I think that's really important and might be something that we can use to address some of the systemic, bigger issues that you've outlined. The other, go ahead. Yeah, please. Yeah,
I just wanted to also add that, as an institution, our structures are based on these, Euro-colonial views and values around what art is. And if we relate that back to the granting and what Mimi was saying around how, we need to support artists and that we need to distribute that risk and take ownership of that, is that our current structures don't actually support that. They want to support stability, and which is great. There should be some stability but they don't support. But when there's stability, there really isn't a lot of room for innovation. And so when the innovation comes, and I think they mentioned this in the accessibility, is that innovation happens in the marginalized or in the fringe, and then it becomes so they're taking all the risks, and so yeah. And in terms of the current structure, as to your point, Mimi, is around it becomes exclusionary. So that's a big thing that we want to tackle. And of course, Mimi, you also mentioned, Canada Council has moved to like 50-50 project operating. So what is the next step beyond that, right? And I think we all have to work together and bring that voice forward to support these changes.
Yeah.
In the community.
Yeah, and I'm actually quite excited to see what Canada Council comes up with in terms of the next phase of emergency funding they have promised to individual artists in the sector. I think that's very new. I've never seen that at any level of arts council. So very curious to see their plan.
Yeah.
I haven't. My brother recently applied for Canada Council, his first, and he got it. And I was like, oh, they actually are doing what they're saying. He's a person, and he applied for the first time, and he received, a little micro grant. And I said, that's great. Like it's sometimes it's hard to see the results of that because we're so entrenched in our own work and those structures. So
perhaps some thoughts on how it's great that we have the government support that we have, but perhaps some thoughts on how we can approach individual donors during this time, because it comes up a lot, and maybe this will help, maybe not. The one thing I noticed was a stark difference, and my colleagues noticed this as well, a stark difference between this sort of throw your money into a flaming pit of despair asks, and we all had those come to our inbox, and they were very long emails from the artistic leadership that were unedited, and everyone was panicking, and I'm not making light of that, but you know what I mean. It's not necessarily the most inspiring thing to open up your wallet, especially at that moment when you're going through the triage wave of that and you're wanting to donate to the Red Cross, et cetera, et cetera. So some organizations, on the other hand, had restraint, and they did this in a smart way. This is what I think would be the smart way. You would not send that message. You would send a message that's very much, we meet you where you are valuable to us, we hope you are okay, and something very short about, this is what we're doing and we're okay. Don't ask for anything, right? And then it was this whole, come to build an inner coalition first. Go to your board, show them the hairy details, come up with some plan, measure the gap, if it's a gap, turn it from being a gap into a plan, and then start moving outward in your spheres of influence to your major donors, get a match going, and so that, a month and a half from now, you start to see these campaigns come out that are really about future vision and future projects and resiliency and innovation and the continuance of the mission, which is what people buy into. And if I've learned anything from Michael Kaiser, one of the things is, by and large, people want to buy into a success story in the arts. We're not the Red Cross. We're not a hurricane relief fund. And I just think I saw the most volume of that wrong kind of fundraising that I've ever seen. I understand why it happened, but I think we should learn from that. And now that we're in this sort of medium term, how do you approach people for money? I think there is starting to widen some light coming in and some space for going to individuals. And I think you can do it this way. You can think of your donors in 4 types: mission, access, social, and status motivated. I'll go through them again. The mission-oriented donor is interested in seeing your mission continue. They're interested in the long-term trajectory. So in this case, we bring to them future projects, future initiatives, really exciting, innovative programming that's going to happen, even if you don't know when it's going to happen. And they can come in as early investors in this, as we have always done. And I think by and large, we've forgotten that people are inspired to hear about those things, and people are ready to hear about those things. And I'm noticing success happening in the background here for things that are going to come out when we're back, programming in person. So that's how I would treat the mission donor. Access, well, it's interesting, that you can still provide really digitally intimate experiences with artists now, and you can do it with great ease. So you can get maybe more famous people that you haven't before to connect with a very small group of donors because they don't have to leave their house. So I've seen really interesting things happen that way that I thought wouldn't work, and I thought people would get bored of them. But they're still doing digital donor lounges that are well attended. So there's a need for that, I think. Same for the socially minded donor that really misses those overlapping circles of people that are a part of our institutions. It is such a joyous, unique group of people that come together around an artistic mission. And if we can really make sure those people are provided with that, there's, you know, couples or friends that you just don't see unless you're around that mission. And some people value that above all else. So let's give that to them however we can in this time, which may become easier as small groups can gather. You get the idea. The status donor is I think, tougher during the digital period that we're in. I mean, it's hard. You know, some might be interested in the kind of recognition we provide during this time, but you can't give the shout out from the stage. So we have to be really creative about what to do. And you were hinting at it earlier, talking about corporate funding. The same thing. It's like we want to be addressed in a public event, and so I find that to be. But just some food for thought that these conversations are advancing. People are really looking to the future, and I think it's important to think about what value you're going to be providing. Yeah. Does that spur anything for you too? Are you doing any of these things?
I really like how you categorize into, you know, 4 groups of donors, and I wonder if there's a little bit more overlap between the mission donor and the socially minded donor, and the access donor and the status donor. You know, like a Venn diagram. Because what we've been looking at in terms of fundraising is the idea that if we build it, people may not come, but if they build it, they will stay. And that is the model that what inspired us was actually Battersea Art Centre in London. They had a fire a couple of years ago, and what happened was their community really came together to help them rebuild, and have stayed on and really consider it part of the community. And so that is one way that we want to explore. And I think it probably ties better into the mission and socially minded donors that you've listed.
Yeah, that's inspiring. And I think the Theater Center is a great example of having that kind of ownership, the way it came to, and it continues. Yeah.
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 And thanks, Ben, for summarizing that as well. Thank you also for validating what we're doing is inconsistent with a smart person who has that experience. Yes, I think when we first closed, we had decided, you know, we're really just going to focus on our core programs and our core groups, which is our students, and we weren't going to talk about whether we're a sinking ship or not a sinking ship. And I think that that helped us really prioritize how we were going to communicate. Students, our faculty, you know, are the artists that we engage with, and we shifted our fundraising plan and allowed for people to not to clutter the airwaves with our asks, because there was a lot of information going out at the time around safety and health concerns and all that. And then subsequently, we've also shifted to support Black Lives Matter and those other very important messages that were out there. We've been focusing specifically on our core donors. So renewals of our donors is where we're focusing and to maintain that momentum for the future. Yep. And really creating opportunities for us to engage with them, and not so much asking for money at this moment, but for continuous engagement. I mean, we're fortunate in that we have access to relief funds, and we have a good mix that allows us to cushion those blows. But we're seeing this as a really good opportunity to focus on stewardship and to bring people along to get and build for that future past 2023, when we hope to be out of this.
I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
I think that's smart.
So I think we were even in our team, we were chatting about like, oh, well, if you look back, you know, like let's say 20 years, like you remember those PBS like telethons that are on TV, like, something like that. It would be engagement, but also just something cheeky and fun. And we're hoping to plan something like that for August, but who knows how successful it'll be. But regardless, it's just about engagement. And I think that because we're not doing performances right now, we take for granted that engagement opportunity when people come to our show and access and feel what you're doing.
Yes.
So we're trying to recreate that through some online engagement and sharing of news in a more effective way. And we're looking at even, okay, like we need to start picking up the telephones again.
That's right.
And just talking to people. Just because kind of you push away from that when there's digital opportunity and people don't just have, there's just a lot of clutter and a lot of you're competing for people's time, right? But now I feel that people have time, so they're more willing to answer the phone.
This is really profound, actually. And one of the things I kept coming to with clients was that they should just make a huge phone tree and reallocate staff and just make it all about high touch ambassadorial work, like just reaching people in their homes. If you can stay in someone's heart and mind that way, I mean, that's the next most powerful thing we have other than the art. I totally agree that there should be, it's just not fancy to talk about on panels like this, but yes, it's still one of the best things. And everyone that was successful did that first. Absolutely. They went through everyone. And I think that has to continue. We have to make very high touch efforts. Yeah. There's a question here about how to encourage artists getting paid in the digital realm. Do we want to touch that at all? I would say that training has been easier to convert to paid, largely. That's what I'm seeing. Why, I'll leave to these other two to answer. And why it's difficult is that we're one of those industries that's in the awkward halfway place where we haven't really learned how to monetize. If you look at any of the platforms that serve the arts that way, we're in danger of ending up like newspapers playing catch up, right? And I don't have an easy answer to you other than I really like stepped sort of models that allow people to engage more deeply as they get more into what you're doing. The idea that there's like a trial that's free and that it steps up very, boil them 1 degree at a time until they're, buying your digital membership. I think those are good models. Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah.
We haven't tried to monetize anything digitally in terms of content. Partly because we're unsure whether if there is too much content out in the world, and so can we give space to somebody else, because that's not our core program. Our core program is not presenting, but we do present as part of training. Training has, as Ben mentioned, has shifted quicker, I guess, digitally. But I think because in the training model, it's still part of your operating. It's not doing more because we can shift in that way because it's not doing extra and beyond what you're already doing. The monetizing thing is really interesting. I know Tafel Music is monetizing their concerts. I'm not sure how that's going, but I don't know. I mean, certainly there's value to it. So, but with so much clutter and content, are we just competing and then it becoming? And then are people willing to pay when there's a free option somewhere else?
We haven't tried to monetize it just yet either. We're basically doing our same old model, as in we are paying the artists and we are pooling presenter fees and things like that amongst organizations. But audiences tuning in hasn't had to pay yet. So I'm with you, Ben, on this one, that I think we might get into the difficult position that newspapers are facing right now, in that they started to ask for subscriptions, but that hasn't really covered for all the losses from advertising. So I don't quite know where we will land in terms of performing arts. But one thing that I've been seeing that might be interesting is that some theater companies have started podcasts, and they've started using Patreon. So they have host, I think it's monthly Zoom meetings, and they have different levels of membership then, just like you said. So some subscription lets you look really deep into their creative process, and some membership is just you get to come to their monthly gathering.
That's great. And an important thought comes to mind about all of this is there's something we're doing when we move into a digital marketplace, is that we're removing the element of geography. And I found that, like, we've talked about quality, which is so important, and I still think doesn't get talked about enough. And then I agree, those are great examples of how you can try to fund it. But I feel like it's so important to mention there has to be a conscious sense that, are we actually now in an acquisitional sense, like not just putting it out there to be discovered, but in an acquisitional sense, devoting resources to a global market? This is a profound shift of the mission. If you look at what a mission is, it's what are we doing, for whom and where? That's the third part of the mission, right? And the how should be flexible, and that's what we're seeing with the medium change. But most of the time, at least in the beginning of this, I've been saying, well, look, you should really be beaming all of your digital stuff and a cone of light right down over top of the people that are the real humans, as we're just sitting in the same city, that might actually come back to your shows. Otherwise, it might be cool to have people from all over the world log on to your live stream, but what is that going to add up to later? So That may seem obvious, but I haven't found that that's been addressed very well yet. So my advice has been start with your core. And I heard that from Michelle. You know, development folks have that instinct. I'm sure you did with yours as well. But what about audiences, you know? Have you thought about that, either of you? Like what you think about with your audiences if you were to go digital and what that would mean in terms of the catchment area?
Yeah, we definitely have discussed that, but we started with at the point of what sort of content would make people want to stay with us for an hour on the screen in their own home, and shout out to everyone who's been following us in this chat so far, because that's what you're doing. And so in terms of content, we've been throwing ideas around in terms of is there something that we need to do together such that it's interesting again and people feel like they're connected with people, even though you're all in your own home looking at a screen? So yeah, in that sense, we've been thinking about who are our audiences in this moment in time.
I love that you put the art first and the quality of the product first. That's just
I work with a lot of theater makers. It's very true to us, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'm being, too colloquial, but we weren't Netflix before this, right? It's all moved so fast. Like it's when the Guthrie artistic director said, but we're not in film. Something very profoundly simple hit me that, we have to just slow down and think about what we're doing that way, right? Your art form may not translate to those platforms. And Michelle, you're saying that you're thinking about that. I mean, that makes sense. Like some things will not translate. And if that's the case, we ought to just have a creative sabbatical, a hibernation, all sorts of complicated questions about the business and the employees. I understand that. But ultimately, if this is what we're in the world to do, we shouldn't be doing it poorly, right? And that I don't think will serve us in the long run. So that makes sense. There was another question that came in about basically the idea that funders make you fill out so many forms and things that it's like you spent the amount of time filling out their forms that the grant was worth. This is a big problem. It's something that is hard to be brave to talk about when you're trying to get funding. It's something that I get to be louder about now. And I'm just going to say, by and large, they're not doing it the right way, because they have to really just trust you to create deliverables and make it as lean as possible to get to that. And we see like the Ford Foundation, and I would argue actually the Canada Council, really striving for that, where others really, it just seems like there's another layer of bureaucracy every year. So I don't have a long point about that, other than just I think that that's true. I think it's okay to speak up to funders and say these things. And okay to also charge for your overhead expenses. That's usually what gets us into trouble. You don't have time to write the grant because you haven't actually built that in. So does that help? It's maybe a more mundane point, but.
No, I think that's really fair.
Yeah.
A few years back, I participated in a focus group organized by Canadian Heritage. I'm not sure whatever happened to that, because we didn't get any report on it, but it spoke about how they were trying to centralize and make more efficient the granting process. And one of the questions at the end of that focus group was around how, if you had to monetize the amount of time it costs you to apply for a grant and do reporting, that whole process, what amount would you attribute to that? And of course, there were many different organizations from the many different heritage programs that were participating in that. But in that graph where people just put their little tack on this number line, it ranged from $5,000 to $20,000. So for a lot of people, that is like half your grant, or but a proportion of your grant could be spent somewhere else to really deliver programs or innovate or do something different or pay artists, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I am totally with you on that, Michelle. If you ever get the outcome of that consultation that you participated in, I would love to see it. I wonder if this is the moment where we start working together instead of, funders doing a thing that feels like on the opposite side from institutions, and, institutions feels like they're on a different side than artists and funders. This is something that I've read in Nonprofit AF. I don't know if you guys follow that blog. Basically, Fule, the author of the blog, had said multiple times that this is a round table. We're not working on different sides of the table. We're trying to achieve the same thing. So let's try to work together. And that might reduce some of the bureaucracy.
That's a great way to look at it. And I find funders are more often receptive to these difficult questions than we think. So we should be more vocal as a sector, because they want those outcomes and they want your success. And as a perhaps a point to end that on, I learned, I'm reasonably certain that Ivy League schools in the US charge up to, what percentage do you think they would charge in overhead when they fundraise? I'm letting the crowd guess because it's a shocking amount. 40%, around 40%.
Wow.
That's what I heard.
5 to 10% to a donor the other day, and they were shocked and appalled by that.
Yes, you have to frame it the right way. And I know this is very practical advice. Maybe that's welcome for the folks listening. I don't know, but definitely it's a huge mistake that's always made in a smaller organization. So part of the sustainability question in this time or any time is to deal with that. And I love the idea that we can create that change. Should we take another question or move to our wrap-up stage?
I've lost track of which questions we've actually answered. Ben, have you been paying attention?
I'm going with the ones that have been upvoted.
Okay. All right, I'll let you take the lead on it. Keep hitting the closed captioning.
There's a question about how to sort of be realistic with funders about the current financial reality. And then it lists, Colleen, thank you for this question, lists the different types of stakeholders. For me, it's a very different conversation with each stakeholder. I think the conversation you have with your operating funder is very open and should be more open than it typically is, and less just always about success. And that's what we're hearing from institutional funders. I think my advice for donors is back to what I said before: be very careful who you bring in, at what time, and what information they're provided. Not because you're lying to people, but because it's not time for them to get on the bus yet. You're asking them too much, right? These emails that were sent to everyone that was in the database, like I went to a show 7 years ago, like I don't remember which company that was. I'm not going to just donate a huge amount of money. So we have to think about when the right time is for that. And the marginal buyer and the marginal donor, we could lose them forever, if we do this the wrong way. So I think there's certain news that those people they don't need to know all of that. They just need to know that you've found a way through and are going to deliver incredible programming to them again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. Let's see. I see one question here from Jennifer about, can we hack fundraising? That is super interesting for me, because that is how I've been thinking about fundraising recently. I think maybe crowdfunding can be something that we can explore. Musicians raising funds for albums, or filmmakers trying to raise the capital to start filming. They've had some success. I don't think we've in the performing arts have tried a lot of that. So that might be a way to somehow hack fundraising.
What do you think, Ms. Michelle? What do you think?
I think that there's definitely been some success stories with crowdfunding. One example that I'm going to share from dance, and I see Andrea Roberts is on. I think it's my Andrea Roberts, but that could be and she may be able to verify, is I don't know if anyone has ever taken a Gaga class, but the Gaga community has really come together to raise money in that crowdfunding way to support those artists that teach Gaga. And then I know that there's also, in terms of content, I guess this kind of relates back to monetizing content, is that rather than charging an admission, there's a pay what you can model, so pay $5 and take a class or whatever. And that seems to also be working as well in terms of the fundraising realm.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and then it's how you get that to translate to perhaps deeper relationships, and it has notions of generationality, that perhaps younger donors are more willing to participate in that kind of a way. And then also, can we keep them? Can we advance them closer to the mission if they're sort of just giving an upvote with $50 or something on a crowdfund? I don't know. I think that I agree that we certainly haven't, as in many other digital areas, moved forward in the arts and tested these things enough. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Good. I think it's a good time to nudge over to our final thoughts, perhaps. I don't know. Or we could take one more question. Let's see here. There's a question about rural groups being at a disadvantage, and it's kind of true, isn't it? I mean, where capital is present,
absolutely.
yeah, you know, where
Yeah.
capital is present, it's
Yeah.
easier to fundraise. Yeah.
Yeah. Although yesterday the keynote speaker, I think a speaker from Scotland, he raised some really interesting points because he was working with rural groups before COVID, and the difficulties and challenges faced by rural groups that he listed are almost 100% what we have all been talking about since the lockdown. So things like feeling disconnected from each other, having to work on via virtually all the time and virtual fatigue, and feeling disconnected from having to work on your own and not as part of a group. So there may be a lot of things that we can learn by looking at the challenges that rural organizations were facing and how they tackled those challenges that might inform us in terms of coming out of COVID.
Wow, that's heavy. Yeah, I understand. That's another 1 hour talk, isn't it?
It probably.
And the disparity there around granting and fundraising, it all exists, right? The further you are from the populace, the less funds that you'll have, and so whether, I think looking ahead, whether distribution can be considered at the government level or even at corporate levels, how you know, a dollar here is not the same as a dollar there, and so figuring out what that distribution should be.
I think we look to the arts councils to be the equalizers of geography, and I think they think that they are doing that, but I think they always have the magnetic pull to the city centers that produce just a voluminous amount of art, and you know, a lot of art that can push each other in different ways and move things forward. But rural organizations, you know, they need that extra boost because you simply can't do the private sector fundraising that you can do in a large city. To be the Captain Obvious, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard, and they're asked to be so many things for their community, right? Whatever your mission says it is, all of a sudden you become the community art center, right? You've seen those sorts of places that are just like run by miracle workers that do so many things to be the connective tissue for a community. I think that's something we should really think about. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Canada is humongous. So that's already a challenge.
We say as we sit in Toronto.
Yeah.
Okay.
Final thoughts from anybody as we sort of round the corner here? What do we want these folks to walk away with thinking about or confused about?
I think in my own perspective and in my own world, I think my final thought for anyone who is a practitioner or anyone who works in an organization is to obviously continue to push forward, because otherwise I don't know where we'll be in a year or two, but to really think about what we were talking about at the beginning is around mission, vision, values, right? Those are the things that are going to push you and drive you forward, and you really need to focus on that and why you're doing it, and that will determine what you should be doing. I do think that we do need to stop the cycle of doing more and more and more. We need to do less, but do those things like amazing. And and I think that we have this time to really try to push that value forward about, and thinking about the future of work and what that means for us as arts workers, practitioners, and what we're contributing to the community.
Yeah. For me, it is about, you know, as we probably all would take time to reflect because of the current situations and life events happening around the world, want to think about how the risks of engaging in creative work is distributed across society at large, and how we as a sector can participate in making some changes that are crucial if we want to move towards more equitable systems. And I want to quote my colleague at Native Earth, who said, whenever I think about action, I always think about what is my action. So it can be an individual who takes meaningful action on your own, and you can, I think all of us has the power to affect how the group behaves.
That's a wonderful call to action. So here we find ourselves, Michelle, saying that We have the stability problem because stability calcifies things and then we can't create the changes we need. Well, we just became very unstable for the foreseeable future. And a reminder from Mimi that, you know, we all have change to make. We all have a sphere of influence in different ways in our professional and personal lives that intersect so much in this community, and that this is a time to really think seriously about what changes we can create while we have that malleability. And my call to think about would be similar, and maybe tie it together, just to remember what it is we actually do in the world is art. And that if that isn't really high quality and differentiated and valuable for people, the whole thing is going to fall apart. And so I think it's really important to think about what kind of organization we are preparing to be when we come back, because we will come back. We've gotten to the point where we feel like this is forever, and it is not. For most organizations, this is going to eventually be, thankfully, a blip in the past. So now it's really important to think about what is the vision for those projects that are going to be so unbelievably exciting that our audiences will rally back and be together again so that we can build strong institutions. I really think, you know, you have to figure out, are you going to be an organization that's just going to focus on perhaps creating world-class art and that is going to lead everything? Or are you an organization that's going to make your art touch people in other ways? Are you going to work, you know, within that intersection between art and other social practices? Are you going to be a part of the solution to all of the things that we need to do to heal society on the other side of this? I think both of those are valid. I've maybe made another dichotomy out of something that's more like a circle, as Mimi said earlier. But you know, I'm not sure we're there yet as a sector in really unpacking and showing the world the ways that we create positive change, the social change, the equity change, the financial, the economic change, you know, the way that we can be a solution provider to help heal society, you know, in the years to come. I think now is the time to reflect on that. So what are we bringing to people? How are we describing that impact, and what impact is it going to have? Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. And hi, everyone out there. I'm so sorry we couldn't actually see you. We could just be talking to ourselves right now. I have no idea.
It does say 494 people. But
that's wonderful.
That's wow.
Amazing. Thank you, panelists. I'll bring Makita back up to wrap us on out. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mimi.
Thanks, Ben.
It was really good talking with you.
Yep, same here.
Cool. I don't know how to get out of this thing. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, we only need 6 more to reach our 500,000. So please, if you can nudge your friends, just do it. Thank you for the panel. It was great. It was actually one of those panels I always say that you have to get back to and listen to it again. Now we're going to have 15 minutes break, and we will meet again for our last session for today and for our conference this year, which is called Activism and the Arts. So please be there in 15 minutes. See you there.